Hello, hello, hello. My name is Nim. I'm here with my colleagues Will and Genji and Christine, and we've got quite a workshop for you this time. If you haven't already gotten our deck, go ahead and download the code and this and the slide. You can see this right over here at bit.ly/KDP_React. And if you're going to be following along with us from soup to nuts today, you're also going to need to create your Kintone developer account. If this is your first time with us, or you haven't done this already, so make sure you sign up for your developer account. You click on this link, and then you're going to create a Kintone subdomain. This is available for you for free as part of your developer account. You can create one at the link over there. Let's go ahead and get started with some housekeeping. So first and foremost, if you click on that link to get these slides, you'll be able to click on that button over there where that arrow points to. It says download zip. That's where you'll be able to download everything in this workshop. It's all available to you. Just click on that link. And then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to sign up for a developer account. Genji has kindly, very, very kindly dropped those links in the chat over here. You can go ahead and click on those links to sign up for the developer program and then create a Kintone subdomain. When you sign up for the developer account, make sure you do not use Safari and that you accept cookies, and you do it on Chrome and Firefox. If you have any trouble with this, please don't wait. What you'll do is you go ahead and tone my colleagues Genji and Will. Genji and Will, can you guys wave? Genji and Will are joining us from Tokyo, Japan. They are my colleagues who run the Kintone developer program on the other side of the Pacific. Ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning to you, gentlemen.
Ohayo.
Here on the Berkeley streets, the sun is setting. It's been a wonderful rainy day in the rainy season over here. We're happy to have you on the side of the Ring of Fire. These gentlemen are going to take care of you for all of your debugging needs. You can even and actually no, let me take that back. The first thing that you do if you're going to run into trouble is go ahead and drop a question in the chat to everyone, and then Will and Genji, one of them will pull you off to a DM if needed. I also want to introduce my colleague Christine. Christine, you want to wave? Christine is joining us from Be My App, which is the mastermind putting all of this together. So thank you, Christine, for your hard efforts working with Genji and Will behind the scenes in ways that I don't even see to make sure that like all of the participants here are going to have like a really valuable and worthwhile experience. So thank you, and thank you all for being here. All right, let's talk about creating a Kintone subdomain. This is what you'll need to do to create a Kintone subdomain. You've got the links in the chat, and just make sure you're not using any special characters, and then you can follow the instructions over here, and then you'll have a Kintone subdomain at your fingertips. Kintone is what we're going to use as the database engine essentially. So you want to make sure that you are unblocked. There's nothing in the way from you spinning up a Kintone subdomain when the time comes. So I introduced my colleagues from Kintone. My name is Nim. I am the technical evangelist at Kintone. So my job is to help show folks what's possible with our platform. How can we use it to solve typically like your biggest business operations challenges, your biggest challenges with workflows and processes. And in our case today, it's going to be looking at how we can use Kintone to help business people achieve their goals and achieve our own personal goals in the process. With me today, joining us again from Tokyo, Japan, we've got Will, our developer advocate, and Genji, one of our developer advocates. They're both joining us from Japan. So where does this bring us to? It brings us to creating web database data from a React component. So the first thing that we're going to go through is a schema of what we're going to make today. So if you're going to build a simplified web application, is going to have basically three components. It's going to have the part that runs on your computer. It's going to have the part that runs on somebody else's computer. And it's going to have the part that holds the data So again, so it's what runs on your computer. We call that the front end. That's those files that run in your browser, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, that all runs in your browser, right? And then you communicate with what's called a server, like somebody else's computer somewhere out there over the internet, and you communicate with them by like visiting a special address, a place where that server is waiting to talk to you, what's called an endpoint. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk to an endpoint that is essentially somebody else's computer, and we're going to say to it to do something, and it's going to do something on our behalf. What it's going to do actually is it's going to go to a third computer, and it's going to get some data, retrieve that data, and then present it to you on your computer. And so that's all we're seeing over here. So you can see that there's these three different computers have three different jobs. On your machine, your computer's job is to render data. In other words, to show it for you, to present it to you, right? The server's job is to be an intermediary managing communication among various resources. In this case, there's just one resource, okay? In other words, to route communication to various resources. And then we've got that other computer, this web service, this database where we're holding the data, and it can be queried and retrieved at will. What we're going to make today is this is what you'll see on your computer. If we've done everything right, what you'll see is you will have built a React app, and it will ask a server for information. That server will go and it will query the database and retrieve information and then present it to your client machine. And this is the data, this is the way the data will be rendered. So this is going to be today's agenda. First, we're going to start a React project. We will then we'll then render an API response. In other words, we'll have created like the beginning of a data pipeline to show the response to the API call, and then we will spin up an express server and call the web database. We've also written some articles that you can use to follow along. These three articles: how to render responses, how to overcome CORS errors, which speaks to Paul's question, and how to get data from a web database. That's all available to you to follow along at your own pace. React and REST APIs, CORS errors, and Express server. Those are going to be the main concepts we'll talk about today. So what's React? Well, React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So in other words, you've got data on your machine, on the client, that's got to get rendered. It's got to get presented, displayed in a certain way. And the history of JavaScript on the internet is essentially like an unfolding history of how to make it more easy, how to make it easier to like keep track of how data gets rendered on your client machine. And so React is, so it's not quite cutting edge anymore. It's been around for a few years, but it represents like, you know, the latest and greatest of how we've solved the problem of keeping track of the way data gets rendered on the client machine. And one of the really neat things about React is that it uses a syntax called JSX, which is like what's called syntactic sugar. What it means is it's a really neat way of basically creating like your own custom, what seem to be HTML elements. They're not actually HTML elements, but they look like them for our purposes. And so they make it easier to build what are called components. They make it easier to build like chunks of our web pages that we use to render data. And the logic that they use, that React uses to keep track of how that data gets passed around, is pretty intuitive. What's neat is that React only updates what's necessary by keeping track of the changes. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about as a concept is REST API. So REST stands for representational state transfer. And so what that means is it's a way of sharing sharing the state of a request as it moves from one machine to another. An API stands for Application Programming Interface. So you can imagine an API as like a place that was deliberately designed for you to interact with and do things with the machine at that specified point. You can imagine a toaster, right? A toaster has a plastic casing and various electronic components inside of it. But the toaster's API isn't the casing and it's not those components. The toaster's API is like the place where you, like those slots where you put in bread, and the power outlet, like the power cord, and like the knob that you use to turn up the heat. Those are the places where the designers of the toaster have deliberately created spots for you to interact with the toaster. In fact, it's, if you tried to break open a toaster and play with its electrical components from the inside, it could even be dangerous. So for software, it's very similar. There's all the things that a software does behind the scenes, and then there's the portions that it exposes to you, which we call the API. And those are the places where you interact with the software and do something with it. Hence the application programming interface. And so together, a REST API, we use that to interact with other machines to retrieve data and perform simple tasks. So for security reasons, if my browser visits google.com, and my client, while I'm on google.com, suddenly starts to request information from some other website, I could be in trouble because it seems like I'm on google.com, but I might actually be interacting with, like, give me all of your credit card data.com. And so there are various security measures on the internet to make sure that while I am on a website, I run the code that website gives me and that I go to no other website. In fact, if I want to go to another website while I am on the one that I'm on, I need to have that website make the request for me. So if I'm on google.com and I want to make a database request to some other, or like make some call to some server somewhere, Google is going to do that on my behalf as a server intermediary to protect me from, all sorts of nefarious situations and code that can run on my client machine. So according to this, because of this design, then servers act as intermediaries, and so then they make and take requests on our behalf, so that ultimately the job of the browser is to essentially to render information to the client. An Express server is a really simple server. It's a back-end web application framework for Node. So it works with JavaScript, and we can use it to act as that intermediary that we're providing. Okay, so what we'll see later is we will have like our React app that'll be running as a client machine. Simultaneously, we'll have like a code that will act as server-side code that will run on like a different part of our different part of our machine. So we'll be able to run a client and a server at the same time, and then we can have the client talk to the server and the server make the call to our web database, and in that way we can facilitate this entire transaction from client to server to database and back again. No problem. So folks, you can imagine over here this red request arrow, it should actually be pointing the other way from the server. At this point in time, please spin up your terminal, and if you haven't done so already, go ahead and hit these commands up. Okay, so what you're going to do is we're going to check our versions of Node and npm. So you can do node -v, that'll get your version for Node, npm-v. This is what's required for React. Your versions need to be better than the ones, sorry, not better, later than the ones mentioned here. And then if you're on Mac, you're gonna you can install Node by entering this command, brew install Node. And if you're on Windows and Chocolatey, Choco install Node.js, it'll give you what you're looking for over here. Okay, now we're starting to get to the fun part. Once you do that, we're going to set up a React app. We're going to do that by creating a new folder called My Project. And then we're going to type in a command called npx. We're going to do npx create-react-app front end. Okay, so what this does is it says to Node, it says, I want you to get this package called create-react-app. We use npx instead of npm because npm will install those modules on your machine and then leave that information there. npx will simply install to execute and then not leave those files on your machine. And that front end over there, this is just the name of the folder that we'll be creating inside of my project. So it'll be my project / front end, and that's where we're going to drop all of this create React app stuff. Okay, so we'll do that. And then and if you're following along with me, great. If you're not, we're going to get into the live coding soon. I'll do this on the fly. Once we do that, we can hop into VS Code. And you'll see we've got like the basics of a React app over here. We've got these JS files, these test files, CSS, blah, blah, blah. We actually don't need much of any of this at all. React boilerplate has been created. We are going to want to spin up our client side front end. And we do that by, in this front end folder, typing in npm start. You might ask, where did npm start come from? And I'll tell you, inside of your package.json, your package.json file is like your almost like your table of contents for your React project and for any npm, any node project. Okay, in package.json, there will be a place where you can define various scripts that you can run, and then and what should happen when those scripts are executed. One of those scripts by default is the start script, and so when you type in npm start, it'll do whatever the package.json npm start script will tell you to do, which it looks like what it'll do is it's going to load, this port up on localhost. Localhost is your machine. So at localhost :300 at port 300, you should be able to see this. Now I mentioned a lot of this stuff is boilerplate. We don't need it. Go ahead and get rid of all of these files, and what you're gonna be left with is index.js. That's the most important thing. Make sure you keep all of this other stuff too. Git ignore, package lock, package.json, and readme.md. But everything else you can get rid of. And we're going to edit that index.js file. On our front end side, so we've got this my project folder and we've got our front end, okay? We've got index.js, and you may have noticed there's index.html. If you haven't noticed it, it's okay. So we're going to start modifying index.js. By the time we're done with our directory structure, we're going to have a backend folder over here, and it's going to have these two files. For now, don't worry about it. And let's dive right in.
Okay, so the current situation we are in, I did a npx create react, and we have this series of folders. I've deleted the extra just as the slide has indicated. So now I have an empty index.js.
Cool. So from here, we want to import React and import React DOM.
So I'm pasting in code from the first code on the gist. We have the React and React DOM, saving it and npm start.
We wanted some way to essentially run like a client-side app. And that's what we're seeing, right? We're taking this thing called myElement, which is a very unusual looking piece of code, actually. If you are used to coding in JavaScript, this is not a string. This is not a, I mean, it's not anything that we're used to. It doesn't have quotations around it, but the magic of React will take this and turn it into something usable. You need something in the background that's going to take this h1 tag inside of a JavaScript file and turn it into something that's not like an error, right? And so there's some magic that's happening in that React DOM.render method that is turning this ostensibly a string, even though it's not in quotes, and interpreting it the way that we're expecting.
What we're going to do is we are going to make a call to a REST API endpoint, and we're going to introduce random user .api. That's good. So random user API is an open API that, so if you refresh the page, you'll see that the person in the middle changes and it generates a random users. And if you access the endpoint /API, you basically get the JSON version, so the data version of the random user. And we're basically going to render that onto our React application.
So what we're going to need to do at this point is we're going to need to take this endpoint and we're going to need to make an API call from here. Okay. So what we're doing right now is we're creating that REST API call. We're going to create a function, and what that function is going to do, it's an asynchronous function, and it is going to fetch information from that REST API endpoint. So what you're seeing right now is we are building this REST API function, and it's got and so what we're going to do is we're going to pass in as a parameter this REST API endpoint, this constant variable to this random user creation. And then what we're going to do is once that endpoint is returned, we're going to turn it into JSON and then present the JSON in our browser. And so what we're doing on line 13 is we are instantiating the, or sorry, we're calling the function. So let's go ahead and open our console, and you'll see that what we've got is these results. So our random our API call was successful, and we were able to present the results in our console. This is boding well for us. Right now we've got this random user, they're a male, blah, blah, blah. These are the, all of the pertinent random information about this person. Okay.
Step we need to do is actually render this onto our React application. So Express is going to be the step after that.
Great. Thanks, Will. So what Will is doing right now is it's
Genji doing it, by the way.
what all 23 of us are doing right now together is we're using React to using its data rendering abilities to create an element. It's going to be an h1 tag, and it's going to be a stringified version of the JSON that we're going to receive from that fetch request. And so what you're seeing Genji doing right now is he's replacing that placeholder myElement with the results of that API request.
Let's see if it works.
One of the things I'm really
Right.
glad about is that I don't think we could screw up worse than I have already. So it's all
All right, so getting back, Genji, could you show us the HTML, which shows the error page? So we've purposely written it like this, so it shows an error. It says objects are not valid as a React child found object promise, which means, which is quite confusing for a lot of people who haven't worked with REST APIs before. So if we look back at the code, what we've basically done at line 14 react.render is we've called a function called call REST API, which is an async function. And to cut a long story short, to spoil everything, react.render cannot render async stuff. Oh no, well, it just doesn't work with async stuff. Basically, react.render, when it wants to render something, it just renders it like as soon as it comes. You give it the first parameter and it renders it. The problem here is that call REST API is an async function. It basically takes time to access the random user server. It takes time because there's a server on the other end, which is processing the request and then giving back the result. And so that's where there's a lag. The reason why the error says that it's like object promise in the error is because of how promises work. So when call REST API is being called, the async function, what it does, it immediately returns something and returns what we call a promise object. And when you're writing promises in a sort of a different manner, basically what it normally should do is it returns a promise object, and after it's done a REST API call or a call that takes time, it resolves it saying, okay, this is the value, this is the real value that you actually want. I'm going to replace it with that promise object that you had for it. But this doesn't happen with React. Basically, it tries to render this pending object, pending promise object, and then it says, "Oh, this is an object. Oh, I'm not dealing with object. I can't render objects," and it's basically blurting out this error. So what we actually need to do here is fix this. And the way we fix this is by using hooks, which you might have heard of before, might have tried out before. But we're going to write this out using hooks. Okay. And I'm sure Genji has some documents on hand that you're looking at that you can look through to write the hooks.
So what do we mean by hooks? Well, remember, so React is designed to manage the flow of data as it gets rendered in your browser, and to do that, and its priority is to do that in a way that uses minimum amount of resources, which means that there are certain times where it does stuff to make sure that data gets rendered quickly, and then there are times where it exposes like opportunities for you to hook in behavior. Okay, in this particular case, if we're going to be presenting data that's coming from a resolved promise, then first we don't have that data to begin with. So React doesn't have anything to present. So what we need to do is give it something to present first, and then give it some kind of a path, some kind of an update pathway. Like, okay, how is this element, how is this component going to be updated and when? And that's what the hook is for. So what you see that Genji is writing, is coding, is the behavior for that. So here we are, we're creating this function called render result. Render result was actually, it's a component is what it's going to be. It's going to be like that JSX syntax. It's going to be that like pseudo HTML element. And what we want to do is we want to tell React first what is it going to look like before anything happens? And then as we receive data, the update needs to trigger. Now you might ask, well, what are we updating, right? Like we've got this initial value, and the way that, and when we talk about initial values in a framework like React, what we really want to think about is something called state. We basically have this collection of initial values. We've got this like a vault where these initial values are stored, because in order to keep everything organized and make sure that React is working the way that it's working, it's got to be very careful about the way that it's exposing its data to us to mess with. So it keeps them in something called a store, right? Or in a state. And so what you're seeing over here on line 16 is like us initializing that state. This is ES6 syntax, as George mentioned, ES6 format code. This is ES6 format code. So this is what you see on the left-hand side, const, this 2-item array, API response and set API response. So what we've got is this 2-item array. The first item is API response. The second is set API response. And it's equal to the output of a function called useState with that following parameter passed in. Okay, so useState takes in one parameter, takes in a string, which is the initial value, and it's going to output a way to update that initial value as well as what that initial value is. Okay, so that's what we see over here on line 16. And then you see we have a hook called useEffect, which basically means every time we update the page, every time we update the browser page, we will trigger this useEffect hook. So we will do this thing. And then what it's going to do is it's going to call that REST API endpoint, and then it's going to update the state. And then when the state is update, the page will get or those components that got updated will get re-rendered. And that's what's happening over here. So why don't we go ahead and give this a shot? And if you had eagle eyes, what you would see is first we had that initial value now loading. And then what happened is that useEffect hook showed it got kicked off, and it made a REST API call, and we received a JSON response back, and then that JSON response was pushed into this. It was used to update the state, and it's now the new value. And then React, now seeing that the state has been updated, now re-rendered the page to account for the fact that the state was updated. So this is working exactly the way that we're expecting, which is terrific news for us. Okay, so what do we do from here? So at this point, what you'll notice is we've got this REST API call that's working. We've got React. If this is your first time using React, this is the core of it. This is a glimpse of the way that React behavior works, which is to present something, and then when data is updated, organize the re-rendering of the page given that new data. Okay, what we're going to do at this point is now move into the second stage, which is overcoming those CORS errors. Will, Genji, is there anything that you want to add?
I just want to add, so we're going to be testing the xkcd API endpoint, just to show that it will result in an error and it will never leave from the now loading because of the CORS error.
What do we show? What do we show? What xkcd is?
Oh yes,
Yes.
xkcd is everybody's favorite webcomic.
xkcd, everyone's favorite webcomic. It actually has an API. So if you, I think Google search xkcd API, there's a reference to the API. I think it's the second one. Oh, that one, yeah, that one. Yeah. So that's all the API documents inside xkcd API. But basically, if you access a given comic strip number in part of that URL, then it basically brings back a lot of data related to that specific comic strip. And what we're doing now is we're trying to access this endpoint and trying to get this data back.
Now, what you'll see is that if Genji hadn't opened up the console, it would just seem like we were stuck in this initial state forever. But if we opened up the console, which Genji was smart enough to do, you'll see that we got some error that was thrown over here, right? That we've been unable. So here we are using our browser. We're on localhost, and we are attempting to access xkcd from a place that from a client side browser, but not coming from xkcd. This isn't allowed. And this is common web behavior. And the way that we solve that problem is by spinning up an express server and then using
But wait, Nim, wait, but why was random user allowed and why is xkcd not allowed?
Why was say again, Will?
We accessed random user and that allowed us to get the data.
Well, that's a really good question. So where I would leave it is that some websites allow you to access them from an alternate origin, and many of them don't. And so it depends on the nature of the request and the website. Paul, this one's for you. What we're going to do is we're going to spin up the Express server, and we're going to use it to route our client side requests in order to get in order to start talking to these other web services that would otherwise gate us out by virtue of this CORS policy. All right, so what Genji will do, whenever you're ready, Genji, is let's spin up that Express server. Let's go ahead and make new directory. So mkdir, and then backend, and then we're going to cd into backend. Okay. And npm init.
Yeah. And then we're just going to enter through all the questions.
Paul, are you asking, is there a link to this website, notes on the Express server? Yeah, this
is all in the gist.
All in the gist. So yeah, let me go ahead. Genji, we're totally doing a switch them up today. Let's see.
And while we're doing that, Genji has gone along to create a new node project. Basically, it's going to include Express, which is the Express server that we've been talking about and we're showing on the HTML. And we also included node fetch, which is going to be, or it's basically the package that allows us to fetch API. And the CORS module, which is needed to deal with the CORS errors that we were seeing on xkcd server. So just making sure if we do cat space package.json, and we should see the dependencies at the bottom with the latest. I guess it's the latest stable libraries. I'm not really sure, but yeah, there we go. Code.
There we go.
So what we have here in the project, we should have a front-end folder that has our React stuff and back-end folder, which we just made quite manually inside the terminal, which has server.js, which we just made, and we're going to be coding on here. So,
all right, I'm going to add in the imports first.
Yeah, sorry for the copy and pasting at the moment. We are running a bit out of time, so we're just going to hurry a bit. Yeah.
And also, I don't want to make a spelling mistake.
Basically, what we basically need to do in order for our server to work is we need to define some port that the server will listen on. It'll wait there to receive a request at us that is going to a specific endpoint. And then it's going to do something once it receives the right kind of request. So we need to tell it where to listen. We need to tell it what to do when it receives a communication. And we need to tell it what to return when it's after it's taking some action. And then we also need, so where to listen. We need to tell it to listen. We need to tell it where to listen. We need to tell it what to do. And then like what information to return, as well as any other options. So there are some other various options that you see in here to make sure that we are like handling the cross-origin resource sharing, and that we are, if the client is accessing the listened onto port at this get data address, which is located on line, you can follow that on line 17, then we're going to make a get request from there to some other place, and get a response and pass the response back. And then what we see app.listen, we see, it's listening. We're gonna tell it to start listening. We're gonna listen at that port. And then this is also going to be like an indication that in our console that this port is being listened to there, like a callback essentially. The React app makes a call to the server. The server makes a call to that web service. The web service returns that information back to the server. The server returns that information back to our client. The client then uses that new information to update the state in React. React, now sensing that the state has been updated, re-renders the page as optimally as possible with the new information in exactly the places where the update is necessary. So Nikki, what we see at the top is we're pulling in these modules that we're going to need in order to run the server. We define the port. Then we are we're instantiating Express, and we're clarifying how to operate, what its CORS policy is going to be, what endpoint we're going to be visiting, what we're going to, and then what happens when we get a request at a certain endpoint that we've exposed. In other words, on line 17, we expose an endpoint called /getData. When a GET request comes to that URL off of our domain, then we do a bunch of stuff that happens in this function. The stuff that we're doing in this function is we are making a request to a third-party web service, which in this case is that xkcd website, and then we are returning the response and passing it back. And then we need to spin up the server. Essentially, we need code to tell the server to start listening on a certain port and do a certain thing. Nikki, is that clear? Okay, great. That helped. Any other questions or anything else that's missing? Yes, what Will is saying is absolutely correct. Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and we're going to keep moving. And let's look at what we can do. Let's look at the tower. So we've got 7:47. So folks, at this point in time, we have a front to back client, server, web service setup. What's missing now is the database part, right? Like let's say we create, like we gotta, we want to ultimately, if this is going to be one of our own projects, we want to have our data living somewhere that we can then access. So this is where Kintone comes in, okay? And so what would happen is at this point, we would, spin up a Kintone environment and begin interacting with the data that we could create in Kintone in a sample app.
You can use React with ASP.NET. It is part of Visual Studio. One of the bootstrapped templates will create that for you.
And let's talk about what is Kintone. So Kintone is what we call a no-code, low-code cloud platform for teams to easily share and collaborate on their data. What I want you to understand from here is I want you to understand the big picture of like why we're bringing it up and why it's important. So, Kenji, can you go to the next slide?
Sorry, yeah, my bad.
So there are lots of there are lots of places and lots of ways where you can spin up databases. What Kintone's sweet spot is in having the data and the conversations about the data be in one place. So you can imagine like you're in a, like from a business perspective, you've got like a dozen places where you keep the data. You've got another like dozen or so places where you're having conversations about the data. And so among like Excel and Access and actual like a real database and email and Slack and texting and phone and all this stuff where like your data and your communications are scattered. And what's missing is a place to have it all together. And that's where Kintone really shines, is as a tool to unify communication, to bring it all together. And what you're seeing right now is what's possible when you've got like the place where the data lives right next to an embedded, essentially the sidebar, where you tag your colleagues that you do your like ordinary work with, like you got your day-to-day workflow with. And so this is like where Kintone gets its power. And when I talk about workflow, you can imagine like making sure that the right people are seeing the right things at the right time. And so you can have a fairly sophisticated workflow of passing something to somebody and perhaps needing to go back again and so on and so forth. And then they're getting notified appropriately. Now, that's the kind of problem that Kintone is really like it's kind of what I'm talking about is the big picture of what teams and departments see when they use a platform like Kintone. But that's not what people come to us to solve a problem for. They come to us because typically there's like some process that really sucks, and some workflow, some place where like things are getting tracked, but they're not getting tracked well, or it's too confusing, or there's too much overhead, or it's driving people nuts for one reason or another. And so that's why, like and so that's what brings people to Kintone in the first place, is this sort of database need, like to track these items, to track them in a way that's simple and easy to follow. And so for that, we have something called an app. An app you can imagine as like a powerful online table, like a table in a database or a spreadsheet in a workbook. And that data is stored in an app as records. And so that app is like a critical piece of what makes Kintone Kintone, that then all this collaboration stuff sits on top of. Kintone is really great if you are not technical, because you can build an app with an easy like drag and drop interface. And this is essentially building a database schema really, really quickly. Now, if you're not technical, it's suddenly making accessible to you something that wasn't accessible before, that was difficult or impossible to do. And if you are familiar with building schemas and all this stuff, this just makes it like super speedy to do. And what's also neat is that you can expand the functionality of apps by enhancing them with client-side JavaScript. You can upload a JavaScript file or link to a JavaScript file in the configurable settings over here, and enhance behavior with it. So what's really neat about that is then you've got everybody on the spectrum contributing, in whatever way they can. So folks who are non-technical or who are even allergic to technology, they can build something that is going to help them without needing to rely on the big guns, right? Like the IT or the developers, who can then focus their attention on more important projects, while the business side self-serves. And on the flip side, developers can either build stuff real quick, or they can enhance this functionality and build something custom for the users with JavaScript. And so this is really like what a company like ours has been out to fulfill on, this promise of what we call groupware, sharing meaningful insights about the data that become operationalized quickly, which is sort of like, at the end of the day, this is kind of the point, right? Like, we want to be able to, in the business of business, we've got things that we want to get done. We do them in groups of people, and the degree to which we're able to share effectively and iterate on our learnings is critical. And so this is like zooming out and looking at the kind of role that Kintone plays. This is what we're about. Now, what does this mean for you? As a developer, we're talking about enhancing the platform with JavaScript. But what we mean is there's two ways to do that, and one is by piping data into and out of Kintone and using it as like a collaboration layer that sits on top of the data. And another is to develop like extensions. We call extensions that like add more functionality to the platform experience. And so inside of Kintone, you've got various different ways to do that kind of piping. REST APIs, we've got API tokens and webhooks so that you can kick off payloads to other REST API endpoints. We've got plugins, which you can imagine as like JavaScript files that have been wrapped in like a package, so that an end user can like configure something. And as I mentioned prior, JavaScript customizations, as well as CSS and HTML, and very, very granular permission controlling. So again, you can make sure that the right people and only the right people are seeing the things that they should see. And so with this kind of flexibility, you can do crazy stuff like build these kind of charts and graphs. You can even play Space Invaders inside of Kintone as well, because it's got this ability to, handle, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS in this way. And so if you've come here for your own edification, your own learning, then there are a few things that you can do to get the most out of Kintone, or to have Kintone to have Kintone help you. One is to use it and use it to play with JavaScript. Another is to post what you learn on tech blogs and to share with your community. And now, if you're looking for Kintone as if you're looking to develop sources of revenue, then with Kintone, you can create and install Kintone extensions. You can consult with firms on achieving business goals, and you can even develop Kintone customizations for customers. So these are all different ways that you can, use Kintone for your own revenue generating priorities. So at this point, hopefully you've created a Kintone developer account, you've created a subdomain, and you should be able to log into Kintone. And when you do, you'll see this welcome screen. This is our portal. This is the first place that you see when you log into Kintone. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to create our first app. Now, as many of you know, when you're creating a table, right? There's the difference between like the schema that you're creating and the data that's in it. And with Kintone, we can separate them out so that we create a schema, we create an app, and then we populate it with data. We can also do both at the same time by importing a CSV. In this particular case, we're going to use a pre-existing template that's pre-populated with data. And it's going to be, our sample template is going to be an onboarding template. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go into I'd like you to type in onboarding into that top left corner. And what you'll see is there's this employee onboarding template app that we can create in one click by clicking add this app, which is what we're going to do right now. And we're going to add this app, and boom, just like that, we have a new app with data already in it. We're going to click into that app. And at that point, we see, remember, an app is like a table with, a table in a database or a spreadsheet in a workbook with more functionality. And that's exactly what we see over here. So we've got these records that are in here. And if we wanted to, we could drill down into any one of them by clicking on the left hand, that blue thumbnail image, and we'll see, hey, there's data here. Fun activities and blah, 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 and associated links. Okay. So this is our app. And what's neat about this is we can use our React client app and our Express server to make an API call to this very Kintone app that we're looking at right now and pull data and render it inside of React, inside of our React app. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to set up the permissioning to make that happen. And we do that by creating an API token. So what Genji is showing you is we're going to go into our settings and we're going to go into the tab called app settings. Actually, Genji, can you hit the back button? Let's do it the other way. It'll just be faster. I want to make it easier for them to click along. There's a little caret next to that gear wheel. Click on that caret and then scroll down to where it says customization and integration, and then click on API token. And once you click on API token, you'll be taken to a page where you can generate an API token and give it appropriate permissions. So you'll click on that gray generate button, and you'll see that we automatically come with the view records permissions, which is all we're going to need right now. Now your API token will of course look different. This is the one that Genji's system auto-generated, and we're going to copy this and we're going to use this very soon. Let's take a look back at our code. Yep, and thanks, Genji. What we're going to do at this point is very, very, very important that you don't forget this. So what we did is we basically made a change to the staging environment, and we need to push that change to production. We do that by clicking the update app in the way Genji just showed you. So after you save the API token, on the right-hand side of the page, there's that blue button that says update app. You'll click update app, and then you'll be ready to go. All right. You'll notice that Genji has in that server, you see that, Genji, can you go back into your VS Code, please? You'll see that we've made some updates. On line 15, we now have a new endpoint to visit, okay? Now you might wonder, well, where did this endpoint come from? And I'll just give you like the short version, which is it's this is an endpoint in our system that allows you to get all records. And we have a public, free, and open API for you to use. So if you wanted to play around with this and see what other kinds of endpoints you can dig up that'll be valuable to you, highly recommend it. You can check out the Kintone developer program. You can just type that in and it'll take you right there. Genji, we don't need to show that. We can just stay with where we are right now, which is we're at this endpoint. And there are two parts of this endpoint that we need to update. Okay, the first is the subdomain. Now remember when you created your developer account, the next thing that you did was you added a subdomain. We're gonna put that subdomain in here. That subdomain in brackets is merely a placeholder. All we're going to do is we're going to replace bracket, subdomain, and bracket with the subdomain in question, which in this case for us is cafe. Alex is asking, can the API token be extracted by someone else from the header? No, it would mean like it's an HTTPS connection. So you're like it would be like that would be encrypted information unless someone is somehow like you've got some kind of a man in the middle attack or something that's like preventing, like something that's exploiting the HTTPS protocol.
It depends where you're placing the API token. So if we were to place it in index.js, which is our front-end React application, then yes, people will be able to extract it. What we're doing is placing it in the back-end code. So as Nim said, you won't be able to extract it unless you're like a real hacker. But yeah.
Alex, that's a fair question. I was answering it from the assumption of like, can it be extracted from someone else while it's in transit? And so that was where I was answering it from. But Will's raising a really good point, which is we do need some kind of like OPSEC to make sure that that this API token is preserved, in a safe place. And for that we have like a file for environmental variables that we'll use that will sanitize our private information, especially if we would ordinarily be like uploading this code to GitHub. Will, anything that you want to add to that?
No, I'm okay. Let's go ahead.
Okay, great. The next thing that we're going to update is that app ID. Now the app ID, each app has a unique numerical ID. We find that by once we're in an app, by looking at the URL and we see that there's a number following a K. So what you'll do is you'll go into your employee onboarding app, you'll look at the URL and you'll replace this app ID placeholder with the number of whatever that app was. In this particular case for Genji's subdomain, it was 152. For you, it's probably going to be like 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that, depending on how many apps you have in Kintone. The numbers will always increment by 1. Okay. And so here's our endpoint. Okay. And now what we'll do is we will update our API token because we need to pass that token in as a header in order for Kintone to let us get this information. For our purposes right now, let's just go ahead and drop that API token in. But we've got some tools to keep this a little bit cleaner, which we'll get to shortly. Okay, so here we are. We've got the API token. We've got the we've got this this new endpoint this new endpoint that we're going to be requesting. Let's at this point save and then let's restart Express and let's restart. Let's rerun npm start and node server.js and let's see where that gets us.
Sorry, my computer's like really laggy. All right, we got that. Oh. Sure. Okay, I'm in my backend, npm. Oh no, it's node server.js.
Yep, node server.js. There you go.
.js.
Cool.
All right, and
all right,
and there we go.
So this will just so this is JSON from the Kintone app that's being presented on our React app. So what we've done is this pipe works, and in fact we could validate that, we could verify that by going into Kintone and taking a look at some of our values over here. So fun activities, for example, you see we've got fun activities about a third of the way down. Yeah, there you go. Fun, like a few more lines down. You got single line text, value fun activities. Yep, a little higher, Genji. There it is. Nope. Fun. You can control. Let's control F for fun activities. There it is.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, great. Okay. So let's add the next step. The next step is we're going to do something about that API token to make it less susceptible to hacking. And so really so the issue with this kind of information is if you leave it on the client side, right? If you have it on the server side, then the client doesn't have any way of getting that information aside from, hacking. And that's distinct from like if you leave data on your client side and then somebody can open up someone can open up console and find values that you can't hide, right? Like you can obfuscate function names, but can't obfuscate like a string that you're going to use as essentially like a glorified passcode. So what we're going to do is we're going to use something called .env. And .env is an npm package that allows us to create a separate file in our project, separate project file, where we will store this sensitive information, and that file will not get uploaded when if we're like pushing our project files, we're pushing them to like upstream somewhere. Okay, and what it'll do is that .env package will lean on Node to inject the environmental variable in real time. And so what Genji's doing right now is he's creating a .env file. And once we do that, the file is very, very simple. It's simply going to be the name of the environmental variable, which is going to be in all caps, followed by an equal sign, and then its value. And so what Genji's doing right now is he's requiring the .env package so that then when we do this, the setup for the injection, the file will know what it is that we're doing. Okay. So from here, we're going to update the headers. So instead of this API token, we're going to reference something called process.env, which is like essentially a node object that you can hang environmental variables off of. And the .env package will recognize this API token key off of this process.env object, and from there it'll inject that value. So we can go ahead and save, and we'll need to restart the server, and take it from there. So now we're expecting that there's no change.
Yay.
Perfect. All right. All right, so let's wrap. It's been quite an adventure that we've been on. First, we started up a React project. We learned that we need to make sure that Node is updated and all of our dependencies are properly updated. And then we also learned the value of teamwork. From there, we created a React project using create React app. and we created a front end. From there, we called the random user generator API. We outputted it into React, and then Paul was asking us some really great questions about, well, like, why do we need an Express server in the first case? And so that's because of, we want to be able to address cross-origin resource sharing. Before we did that, we started to deal with the way that React handles asynchronous rendering, and the way that it updates, it re-renders its data based on updates to the state. So we looked at how can we update the state? What is state in the first place? Do we need to start with something, and then we need to handle a process of updating it in the right way for React. And so we were playing around with the use state and the use effect hooks. And then we started getting into those CORS errors, how to avoid them. We built an Express server project on the back end. And things started to sail a little bit smoother for us over here. We were able to spin that up. We saw that we were getting the results that we were looking for, piping in data from an external API all the way through our intermediary routing server and into our back into our client. And then we slapped Kintone on the back end, and now I'm looking at it from the perspective of, okay, now instead of an API to some public API, now what if this is our own database? We talked about how Kintone, we could use it as a no-code, low-code database to quickly spin up our own data, and we were able to push that into to go soup to nuts, bringing that information from Kintone all the way back into React, where it updated the way that we expected. And then we wrapped it up by making sure that we were protecting that sensitive sensitive information by setting it up as an environmental variable and protecting it using the .env package. Let's go to the next slide. So what would you, so now we're here, and now what could we do? Well, so there's lots of new and interesting things we can do to continue challenging ourselves. There's a great list of public APIs that I highly recommend you check out. You can also try making post requests to Kintone to add data in there instead of just get requests. And just a little hint, you'll need to change the permissions in your API token in order to do that. You can play around with React and see, okay, well, how can I take this response and present it differently? How might I be able to use React components and props and children to manage the flow of data in React as the state changes? And then we can also play around with deploying your app to somewhere like Heroku so others can see as well. And I do recommend that you share your experience on dev.to. So where could you get help if you're stuck? Well, let me tell you, Genji and Will are amazing people who can help you when you're stuck. They and their colleagues monitor the Kintone developer program community on our community forum, as well as on Stack Overflow. So there are folks in our team who scan that day and night, and we do a pretty good job of getting back to you very quickly with answers to your questions. So this is a place where you can go to get help if you're stuck with your code. And we've got new content, new workshops that are coming up. This is the place to go to check out our events. I want to thank each and every one of you for chilling with us today, and especially if you got on the horn, like Damien, MVP right over here, just really sharing your knowledge with all of us. This is what it's about, folks. All of you for your participation. However you participated, it was wonderful to have you.